Hello, Avatar fans, and welcome to the next episode of the Avatar Online podcast. This is going to be episode 232 of our regular shows, and we're recording this on July 31st, 2021. This is going to be our Suki Alone review special, but we will also cover a little bit of news just before we get into that. But this is the podcast for the fan site AvatarTheLastAirbenderOnline.com, and I'm going to be your main host for this podcast, Morgan Airspeed Prime. Joining me on the podcast is Greg2B from the site.
What's up, everyone?
Excellent. So, like I said, we're going to start off with the little pieces of news that we have. So the first one is just a quick bit of news that we sort of missed out. I think a lot of people missed it from San Diego Comic-Con just because nothing really happened that was that big. But Diamond Select did have a panel, so they all went up as videos. And right at the start, like literally within the first 40 seconds of the Diamond Select video, they cover what wave 5 of the figures is. So this is their kind of 6-inch action figure line, and they confirm that wave 5 is going to be Blue Spirit Zuko and Iroh, specifically I suppose late book 2 Iroh when he's in his kind of Earth Kingdom outfit. Looks like there's going to be a lot of accessories, but previous waves would suggest that there's very little chance that all of these accessories are going to come out on the final figures, just because we've seen it happen a few too many times that there's no way all these figures are coming with 3 different heads and all this extra stuff. But they are what you'd expect. The Blue Spirit Zuko looks like it has a normal Zuko head, a Blue Spirit head. The mask is a separate accessory. Finally, Zuko comes with the swords, and so on, and then the Iroh, of course, comes with a teapot, the cup. He also has a really cool sort of fire-breathing head, which I hope they keep that accessory. But it just makes me wonder, how is that Iroh figure going to work as an action figure? I don't know how they're going to put the articulation on that and actually do it effectively without it being one of the most complicated figures we've seen. But what are your thoughts on what they're doing for Wave 5?
Yeah, no, his outfit definitely seems on the more, intricate side of things. And yeah, I guess unless, depending on how to do the cloth and this stuff like that, or imitation cloth, maybe it can be done pretty well. But I do like all the accessories that they do have planned out for them, even if they don't give you all of them. Like the one with the fire for Iroh, I think that one definitely seems cool, but I guess I would suspect more they would do the one with the hand and the flame in it rather than the whole additional face sculpt, especially since the flame effect seems quite detailed on that one. But no, they're definitely really cool, and I think those are ones that are definitely worth having. If they, could have had those even earlier, maybe it would have been cooler as well.
Yeah. I think the Iroh is cool, like the first proper, I suppose, Iroh action figure that's not the Funko Pop. The Zuko, I guess you had to do him eventually, but I think a lot of people would have much preferred a lot of other characters first before another Zuko. But, it's fine. I've kind of lost a lot of my interest in the Diamond Select figures. I haven't been buying them since the first, I think since Wave 2, basically. I haven't really been looking at them, just because the other stuff I think looks a lot better, especially for the price and so on. But the second and last piece of news is kind of the big one. So we've been quite heavy on the Avatar Legends role-playing game for the last while, and that's because, of course, we're building up to the Kickstarter, which, as of the recording here, is in 3 days. August 3rd is when the Kickstarter is going to go live, and interestingly, they put up a draft version of the Kickstarter. So it is effectively what the Kickstarter is going to be. It's just in a draft state where you can't actually back it yet, but there's a feedback thing you can give based on how it looks. So we get a look at all the different pledge tiers of how you're going to be able to get the books and what their special things are that they're offering. And then in the background, they've also been doing a lot of pre-launch stretch goals. So far we have met 2 of them, which has got us some dice, plastic dice, and then we recently met the one that got us a cloth map of the Avatar world. And now the current one is for a pack of kind of technique cards, basically, that will, just it's more materials to help you play the game. They're calling it the Combat Action Deck. It's to help you with easy tracking of combat exchanges. So I guess that will have like a lot of guard characters and stuff like that, just so you have more of a sense for what you're fighting in terms of the NPCs. So I suppose before we get into the Kickstarter, what are your thoughts on these pre-launch stretch goals that they've had so far?
I think those are really cool. I mean, I like that they're doing, all of this sort of, I guess, sort of just extra materials that you can get, and just, I mean, of course, it builds up hype for the Kickstarter and everything like that. But so far, they've been pretty successful with them, and for people who are interested in them, they definitely seem pretty cool. And even if you're not interested in the game so much, these are items that you could be interested in just because of like the material value of them, and I guess the exclusivity that they have just towards this Kickstarter in general. So no, definitely are pretty interesting items that they have up here, just in general.
hmm And then the new thing with this draft is with the dice pack, there's also this deluxe dice pack. Now, there's a specific tier, the highest, most expensive tier that you can go for on this is $200, which basically gets you special edition books, which we'll go over in a second, like basically everything physical, everything digital, plus you're paying basically $100 for this deluxe dice pack, which is, again, it's 12 dice like the plastic set, but they're saying that this is ionized obsidian dice created by Level Up Dice. They obviously have the symbols on them, like I said, and they each have an intricate elemental design that flawlessly flows around each side of the die. It seems to come in an Avatar Legends box. Looks very, very nice, but obviously it's going to be like, do you treat this as being worth 100 to go for that really high tier or not? I think a lot of the feedback has been you need to put out a few more pictures of these to make people actually like go for these or not. But what are your thoughts on this? A really sort of high-end kind of collector's thing here as their sort of most deluxe kind of physical item.
Yeah, no, I mean, it definitely looks pretty interesting. I mean, like you said, I don't know if it's quite, just based off of what we see in this one image, which I think there's only one image on this preview page, at least as of now, of those deluxe dice. I mean, I don't know. I thought the original dice that they had looked pretty cool as well to me. So, I was already interested in that. I don't know if it's worth it for me as someone who might not play the game to really, value the deluxe dice pack, but they definitely seem, at least on cursory glance, pretty interesting, or just, pretty nicely designed in general, especially with the color scheme that they have. That's sort of like a gradient between different mix of colors. So, I guess if it's something that you're really into, it might be worth it. But I guess we'll have to see, how that really goes.
Hmm. Yep. But yeah, we'll go on and we'll go over, I suppose, the pledge levels, just so people know what we're kind of getting into in the next few days. So, first tier is called the Firefarer tier. It's $20, and you get the PDF of the core book and every digital stretch goal that is unlocked during the campaign. And those digital stretch goals are going to be basically extra playbook, so character archetypes, the icon and so on, the successor, more of them, and also new legend characters, which we'll go over in a second, which is basically how they are implementing sort of, hero characters, like the actual main characters of Avatar, Korra, and so on, into the game. So that's what they're talking about there. So you'll get basically everything to play the game digitally, is how that tier is going to work. The next tier is the $50 Winged Lemur tier, which is that you get the digital, everything digital, plus the physical copy of the book, the core book. So that's pretty simple. The next one is the $75 tier. It's Otter Penguin. So you get the core book and all stretch goals. So that's physical and digital. So right now that means you're going to be getting the dice pack. You're going to be getting the map of the cloth map. And likely, I assume we are going to unlock the pack of cards plus whatever else there is over the course of the campaign. So that will add up. This tier will add up, I suppose, as we go on. In that they're teasing that one of the first money goals is a dice bag, so there'll be that included as well, plus likely some other stuff. So that's that. The $100 Polar Bear Dog tier is basically the previous tier, but the book, you now get the special edition version of the book with a new cover. Now, it's interesting that they're giving you an option on this to choose which of their two images you want on the front and which one you want on the back. So you can have Aang as the front cover or Korra as the front cover, and then whichever one you don't choose is the back cover. And it's interesting that they're giving you that option. And then, like I said before, $200 tier, Sky Bison tier is the previous tier, but you get the deluxe dice pack. There's also a retailer tier, but I don't think there's any need to go into it here. So overall, I definitely like this. Obviously, right now, there's only a few items included in some of these, but as the stretch goals are met, there's likely going to be a whole lot of extra physical and digital items as we go on. So what are your thoughts on all the tiers and stuff that they have going on here?
Yeah, no, I think it's a really good breakdown that they have here for the items that you can get. And I mean, it's, I guess it's not sort of as, crazy as some other Kickstarters where there's like a zillion different things that you can get. But, they do also have like the options that sometimes to add add-ons to things as well. So, you could, sort of mix and match depending on the level that you purchase in addition to whatever else stretch goals that you actually get. So, no, I think for what they have planned out here, this looks pretty good and pretty, straightforward.
And then the text actually features a couple of very, very interesting things. Probably the most interesting thing for us, where I suppose we're maybe more interested in the kind of the lore stuff around the game maybe than the game itself, is what they say at the end of the sort of page on settings. The Avatar Legends RPG core book includes a setting chapter with 50 plus pages of information about the eras, including important characters and plot hooks for each, in addition to never before released canon material on Avatar Roku's era. The setting chapter provides enough material for anyone to pick up and play the game, even if you don't know the original stories by heart. So I think this is what we were waiting for here, to just see, like, okay, how are they bringing people in who are maybe more of a fan of games and maybe not as into Avatar? Here's what they're going to be doing. There's going to be 50 plus pages with details on, here are the key characters from this era, this era, this era. And then, oh yeah, we don't know much about Roku's era, so they have exclusive, never before released canon material on that era. That immediately makes this book kind of worthwhile to get, because it has new material in it. We'll see what it is, but I'm guessing it will just be like, who are the characters important to this era beyond Roku and Sozin, which is where basically all we really know about it. So I'm guessing that will be like leaders during the era, like who's the Earth King during this time and so on. But what are your thoughts on that? We were sort of discussing that there wasn't a lot of this sort of flavor stuff going on in the quick start, but now we know there's going to be, like, I guess a quarter of the book is going to be setting almost.
Yeah, no, I'm really curious to understand how they, I guess, sort of describe or tell this. Is it like more, I guess, just sort of like, bullet point type of things, or if it is sort of like, mini sort of, I guess, like flavor text is what we've been calling it and stuff. So no, this is definitely pretty interesting, and it's cool that it comes in like the core book, so you could just get the digital one and you could still get this information. You don't actually have to go to an upper tier unless you really want it. So no, I think it's really interesting to see that there is new material. I wonder how, I guess how much they work with the creators or the writers or whoever in order to develop this content so that hopefully, I guess, it fits in line with everything else. That would be the ideal goal with this. And I wonder if this is something that they'll do with the other books that they were talking that they would come out with too as well.
Yeah, I'm really interested to see that, in terms of if they do explain how this information came about, in that there's no writer listed. Like, they at the end of the Kickstarter, they like credit the whole team basically, and there doesn't seem to be like a writer. There is a license like liaison person, but like, are we talking Mike and Brian here, one of the writers, just people at Nickelodeon? That's what I'm not sure about, but they're saying it's going to be canon, so they're being kind of careful to note that, so that's interesting. And then I think beyond that, the only other thing to go into is the legends. So there's going to be NPC legends, and they're saying that in the core book there's going to be Avatar Kyoshi, Avatar Roku, Iroh from the 100-Year War era, Aang, and Korra. So this is going to be basically teach you how to handle these characters within the game, and I'm guessing it's just a really sort of custom character sheet for these characters, and in terms of how to play them as NPCs, or potentially if you wanted to go up against them as like the enemy in your story. They also, in terms of mentioning characters, name General Kuvira. I'm not sure if general is maybe the term, but okay. Um, so Kuvira is likely going to be one of the stretch goals, and then in the stretch goals, they say Tenzin is going to be one of the ones that will be unlocked at what is it, 300,000? Yeah, so yeah, Tenzin. And again, this is how characters like this is basically how you will learn the higher level bending techniques. So you need like a Tenzin or an Iroh to get your lightning or your high level airbending skills. So this is going to be cool. This is what I think most of the stretch goal unlocks are going to be. It's going to be a lot of the adamant character sheets and then NPC legends. So what are your thoughts on this, a new mechanic we didn't know about before?
Yeah, no, I like that they're giving you the option to potentially get new mechanics and new, I guess, just sort of characters that can level you up, since that is seems like that is like a function of how you actually get your bending skills leveled up through the actual playthrough of the game. So, I think it's a cool way of sort of, incentivizing people to sort of, keep things going and whatnot.
hmm So yeah, like I said, there's only 3 days until this Kickstarter goes live. I'm very interested to see how this does. I think they're at like I think just under 4,000 followers at this point. So 3 days to get another 250. It depends on, I suppose, how much they promote it on social media. But even if we don't get it, I'm guessing it'll just be an unlock fairly early on, and we'll still get the deck of cards and all this other stuff. I'm just interested to see how it does. They're saying their initial goal is 50,000, which is 5 times the one for their previous game, Root. But I think they're going to meet that with no problem at all, in my opinion. So I think we're looking at for sure probably a million plus. We'll see how quick it gets there, and that's just something in terms of judging. Okay, just how popular is Avatar? We have a direct comparison between Root and this. That's going to be interesting for me. So I suppose, Greg, any final predictions on how well this is going to do?
No, I mean, it's going to do well. I have pretty high hopes on that. It's just sort of how far can we get in sort of like the stretch goals.
hmm Yeah, at the moment, I'm thinking, unless the shipping is absolutely crazy, but they seem to say that they have like, you know, things in place for shipping across all sorts of regions. I'm
Yeah.
probably gonna go for the $100 tier just because I want the physical stuff like the cloth map and the dice and especially the special edition kind of book. I think the cover just looks really cool, so I think that's what I'm going to go for, unless those dice suddenly look to be like absolutely amazing. But we'll see what else they add. So I suppose at this point, are you actually going to planning on getting this, or where are you at with actually getting it yourself?
I don't know. I think I'm gonna support it regardless. I just don't know if I want to go for like the special edition one, which, like you said, does look really cool. So that might be one to go for. So I don't know. I think if I were to go for the physical ones, it would probably be either the 100 or the 75, if not just the 20, just to sort of be able to read stuff. But yeah, no, definitely see. I definitely don't have the need to go all out,
Yeah.
just because I don't really have a huge need for all of it. Even though this is, I guess a pretty exclusive as of now piece of Avatar merchandise that we have never had before, and who knows how easily it will be able to come by later on.
Yeah, I think they'd have to add, I think, something extra into that super deluxe tier. I think to make me go for it, but we'll see how it goes. I suppose again on the special edition cover, it does say holographic laminate, so I guess they're
Mhm.
gonna go all out, and it looks like if they do those covers well, they could be super nice looking with all the elements going on. So that's something to look out for. But yeah, 3 days to go until that. And from there, we'll move into our main topic for this episode, and that is going to be our review, our in depth review for the new Avatar comic that just came out earlier this week, Avatar The Last Airbender, Suki Alone. So, I suppose quickly we'll run through the creative team here. So, obviously, it's written by Faith Erin Hicks, art by Peter Wortman, colors by Adele Matera, lettering by Richard Starkings, and Comicraft's Jimmy Betancourt, and of course, published by Dark Horse Comics. So, as we usually do, the way we're going to do this is we're going to start off with just some kind of brief general thoughts overall about the book, and then we'll jump into sort of going through it more or less page by page. We'll sort of group it into like 3 pages here, 2 pages there, depending on what's going on. But yeah, we'll get into this. So I've obviously had quite a while to prepared my thoughts on this book because I got a review copy like a month before everyone else. So, Greg, what were your thoughts on Suki Alone after all my sort of building up of how good it is and so on?
Yeah, no, there definitely was some build up there, but no, I think overall, my sort of general thoughts is I do like that Suki was able to finally get the spotlight. I think that was sort of like the key thing that everyone sort of wanted, despite of, however we sort of got it in whatever format. So no, I do like that we sort of got the spotlight for her. I do like, sort of the idea of the Suki alone, the Zuko alone, the Korra alone. I think it fits that bill overall. There were some nice, sort of side, funny moments in this, even though overall it is a pretty, somber story. I do really like the flashbacks that they have in here. I think that definitely adds a good bit too, which is something that I feel like we're always mentioning for other stories, in animated form or just in the comics in general. I think some parts of it were, I guess, a bit sort of predictable in where they were sort of going with the story, although I'm not particularly sure how that would have been avoided. But, I think in the end it worked more or less. And I think, just in terms of the story in general, just because we know of where this is placing, or at least we assume we know where this is placing before, but now, of course, we know exactly where it is. Just sort of, always in my mind of how it would line up with the overall storyline of Avatar, since we do have the full series to the end, and we also have Korra as well, and we do know bits and pieces from other eras. So that was something that I was curious in general, just how well would it fit in the overall storyline, considering we do know what happens after this for the most part. So those were just some of the quick thoughts that I had in general when sort of going through this for the first time and a couple other times that I've reread it.
Hmm. Yeah, I myself, I think it's definitely the best of the three one-shot comics. This awesome Ladies of Avatar trilogy. It's really interesting to look back on it now that we have the three and just to see like how much progress they made from book one to book three. That the Katara book is just you almost feel like it's not even the same people making it because it was just so unimpactful and there was so little going on in it. They made progress with the top comic, but there were still sort of frustrations because it's like you ended just as it was getting good, whereas this one feels like, oh, finally some must read content. It's got Suki backstory, which we had never got anywhere else, and you're filling in some gaps with Suki on, you know, one of the more eventful kind of things you've placed a character in. Like a character is put in prison. Like how does she deal with that? We obviously caught up with her right at the end and saw how she eventually came to join the team, how she escaped. But what was she dealing with between being captured? And that's what this book covers. And that would have been a great story all by itself. I think even if this was just the Boiling Rock content, it would still be the best of the three one shots. But the flashback stuff is what puts it over the edge because that's what really makes it sort of Suki alone. It having that flashback and really developing Suki and presenting different sides of her that we hadn't seen before. That Suki's always this very likable, skilled character. We want to know more about her, but she doesn't get the same level of sort of screen time or page count as the other cast members. And a book like this really helps to sort of bring her more in line with the other characters. So I think that's the biggest sort of strength of this is that it earns that Suki Alone title, and that's definitely a big thing for me. Like you said, that there's maybe a little bit of a kind of issue of like the plot in the Boiling Rock's a little predictable, but where it places and what it like challenges Suki, I'm fine with that because it is a one shot. Um, Other than that, there's a few points of kind of what's become sort of common with the Faith Aaron Hicks kind of writing of just playing a little fast and loose with sort of some detail continuity thing, which we'll get into. But otherwise, a massive improvement. Best of the one shots. I personally find it to be better than all of Imbalance and like Turf Wars, um, but I still would prefer the comics be a continuation past Imbalance, just because I'd like to hope they finally found a way to do one shots going forward as strongly as this one, but I don't really have the confidence that if they did another trilogy of one shots that they'd all be Suki Alone quality. Um, so yeah, with that out of the way, general thoughts. Let's just get into this. So obviously, if you're listening to this, grab your copy of the book, follow along with us, because like I said, we're going through it page by page. We won't be jumping around here. We'll be doing this all in order. So we'll go through all this, including the stuff that we already got as preview pages, just so this can be a complete review. So first page, we start off with Suki about to be sent off to the Boiling Rock on a warship here. So Azula is there to obviously send her favorite prisoner off. Any last words before I send you to the Boiling Rock? Suki doesn't answer her, so she's like, giving me the silent treatment. That's no fun. Don't you have a message you want to give to someone? Like that boy with the boomerang. What's his name? Saki? Suka? Sokka, whatever, I know. I should tell him that you're desperate for him to come and rescue you. I'm sure he would if he could. Then he could capture you both and take turns tormenting you. Doesn't that sound like fun? And Suki says, really noticeably here, I don't need anyone to rescue me. But Azula warns her, you'll be completely alone at the Boiling Rock. None of the other Kyoshi warriors will be there. So no sisterly bonding in captivity. I want you to experience just how hard Fire Nation prison life can be. Fighting your fellow prisoners for miserable scraps just to stay alive. Just think, only a short time ago you were the leader of the Kyoshi warriors, respected and feared, but now your sisterhood is in ruins thanks to your failures. Now you get to watch from a prison cell while the Fire Nation rolls over the Earth Kingdom. So they're the first 2 pages there. So immediately it's interesting because it's Faith Erin Hicks' first time writing Azula, a character who in interviews she had previously said she was kind of a little bit fearful about writing. This is just sort of filling in the gaps a bit, but I think it's pretty well written Azula here. Obviously, the problem comes up straight away here of how does Azula in this scene know about Sokka and Suki's relationship to bring it up here. You obviously get what they're referencing here in that this is meant to be her referencing the not the boiling rock, the invasion scene where Sokka and her have a little bit of a face off. Obviously, timeline wise, it's kind of weird in terms of where exactly is this set compared to what section of book 3, but it is what it is. So again, a little bit of just like, I shouldn't be questioning why this is the case, but it does come up like has happened before. But Greg, what are your thoughts on these opening 2 pages here?
Yeah, no, I mean, other than that sort of bit there, having Azula here for the send off, just in terms of, how you would think it would work in the story, more or less makes sense. And, I think, despite, any reservation, Bather and Hicks might have had with writing Azula, I think, the dialogue here feels in tone with the character. Even if it is, like you said, it's just sort of like an in-between gap, and you can sort of go off of what we already know of Azula in terms of here, rather than having to deal with like, future Azula and that sort of stuff, which, I would think for anyone would be a lot harder to sort of get a feel for in general, and might, require more people involved for that. But no, I think for this part here is, it's a nice bit of, I guess, banter here, sort of ish, between the two of them.
Yeah, I like the scene from like Suki character perspective because surprisingly, in a way, Azula has no real effect on Suki because Suki's strong enough to just kind of see that Azula is just trying to manipulate her, make her doubt herself, and have these weaknesses. But no, Suki stands strong in this opening scene, as you'd expect her to, and doesn't really allow Azula to have any fun from this as such. So it's an interesting dynamic that Azula's usually used to being able to dominate whoever she's in the scene with, but she's kind of left just sort of talking to herself here because Suki doesn't say a lot. So I definitely like that, and so the third page here, the last sort of Azula scene is, I'm doing all of this especially for you because you're my favorite prisoner and you deserve the best the Fire Nation can offer its enemies. Well, since you're no fun at all, I'll have to make my own when I track down the Avatar and his little group. Have fun cooling your heels in prison while I destroy your friends, as Suki gets on the kind of war balloon airship here. So I think the final thing with this scene to talk about really is just, where is this scene placed, really? I think because of the previous scenes, there's a few things you have to note here. Is that Azula is talking about wanting to capture the Avatar and Suki's friends. So it's at a point in the story where Azula seems to be aware that Aang is still out there to be captured. Um, I take this as being a setup scene for what Azula says to Sokka in the invasion, rather than this being set afterwards and this being a weird thing of her saying to Suki what she said to Sokka. I think it's the reverse.
Mm.
So it's still a bit of a weird one because that has to set it like, I suppose, be- before the invasion, but like after the start of book three. That way, Azula can possibly learn about Sokka's Suki connection from Ty Lee, who said it to Sokka in 220, Crossroads of Destiny, when she was dressed up as a Kyoshi warrior. Um, that's the only way I can explain it, but then you have to set it at a specific part in book three where Azula has caught on enough to sort of what the way Zuko's been acting to think Aang is still alive. Um, it's one of those ones where it works, but I feel as a reader I have to do all of the work myself to try and place this when I actually get the feeling that maybe not as much thought went into the writing of this scene, which is similar to previous scenes that we've discussed, mainly from Katara and the Pirate Silver, like with Toph and Katara arguing about like, I thought him earthbending in a day and it took him weeks, even though that is not at all the way it played out.
Yeah.
Or the whole Aang learning about how the Fire Nation, lie about the Airbenders before book three. So I just take this as being one of those things, and it's minor, but the details are important. And as the discussion of this book has sort of progressed, I've seen a few too many people trying to sort of like defend the idea of like the details don't matter, just let the writer write what they want. It's like, I think that's a little bit of a slippery slope to just be like, the details don't matter at all. This, especially when she said in interviews that it's easier for her to write these books set in between, but it's the books in between episodes that have been where the continuity errors have come from. There's not an error in Toph Beifong's Metal Bending Academy or Imbalance, and that's going into the future, but there is in these other books. So that's why I sort of make a little bit of a kind of deal about this, is just that this is a bit of learning, I suppose, that the writer needs to be aware of to make this clearer, which you could have done by just having a part of the scene be like her say, "Who's that boy?" like Sokka, Suki, whatever, and then Suki be like, "How do you know Sokka?" and then Azula just say, "Oh, like so, like Ty Lee said it," or something like that. Just explain how this actually comes about. Now, to be fair, the one thing I'll give this scene is that it's also not explained in the invasion episodes how like she knows the connection either as such. But this is meant to explain that. But then this, it's a really weird dynamic how like this solves the problem for the series but creates a problem for itself. But what are your thoughts on this? Like, do you treat this as just being a minor point, or how do you interpret like how this is actually meant to be read?
You do bring up a good point there in terms of just how, when we're considering the timeline of things, how is it being placed? Because it does feel, from looking at it from cursor, it does feel like it would come after the fact, just because we know the characters have more, I guess, just sort of involvement with each other, and it seems like that would be where, it would initially be placed. But considering when this is in the actual time of the story and how long she's there, which is another thing that I'm curious to just how long a time of the whole, I guess, sort of her temporary prison sentence actually is, how much time has actually passed during that. So I don't know. I mean, I think it definitely is. I guess you can sort of like hand wave it off and sort of say, they're just trying to tell the story. But I guess sort of considering that we're trying to sort of keep things in tone, and these are, as far as we know, official canon, stories that are being overseen, you would think that a lot of it would fit mostly in place. Like there's always things that, slip through the cracks. Even in like, the other ones, there's been things where we're sort of like, does that really make sense or does that character really know that? But it sort of fits in the storyline here. So I definitely can see the point of bringing it up, just in terms of where it actually fits, especially I guess just depending on, what does happen with Azula in the future if we ever do get, stories like that in general.
Mm. Yeah, the reason with this scene specifically, why I kind of am like really making a point out of this, is just that these 3 pages with Azula are clearly formed around the mid-season book 3 finale, where we have the scene this is setting up of, you know, her mentioning my favorite prisoner, which is referenced again in this scene. So you get those lines of dialogue that they're referencing here of like, here is Azula coming up with the things she is going to say to Sokka when she gets to see him. Um, you should be more aware of continuity, given that you are using continuity to kind of form this scene. But we'll move on. So yeah, we are on the airship here, heading into the boiling rock. We hear the other prisoners who are on the ship as well talk about it. I've heard so many stories about the boiling rock. People go in and they don't come out. Someone says that they've done hard time before, they can handle it, but not like the boiling rock. You haven't. So we see they go up on the gondola. Um, is this guard meant to be the guard who has an issue with Chit Sang? It kind of looks like
I
him.
thought that too.
Yeah, yeah. So it might be that guy. So that's kind of an interesting note. But he says, "Let me guess. Before you saw this place, you had dreams of escaping. Better leave those dreams behind. No one escapes the boiling rock. You belong to us now." As she heads in. So just a cool sequence. Of course, we got to see Sokka and Zuko arrive, and like we got a nice look at sort of the arrival into the boiling rock and how it all works with the gondola, and how it's set up. And here's another view of that just in the comics this time out. So some nice references here, and just to get to see like Azula has just sort of set the stage for emotionally this is what your experience is going to be like, and now she's sort of seeing it and then seeing other people react to it. So I definitely like that setup of like the boiling rock is still this like named notable prison, the worst people go here. Now Suki, you're going in too. A nice setup for this kind of key location. But your thoughts on her arrival here?
Yeah, no, I think like you said, the setup does work really well because Suki wouldn't really know anything, particularly about, this prison per se. So you have to sort of set the stage for why it's so important, why it's sort of, such a feared place. So having the prisoners do that, have the guard there actually, mention to her, sort of the despair of this prison. And, you get to see a little bit of her reaction in the frame there. Just sort of adds to sort of just the importance of her being at this location.
Mm-hmm. And then we cut to our first flashback sequence for Suki. So we see a young Suki here. I'm guessing this is before she's 8 years old, given that we roughly have that piece of information that she starts her training at 8 years old. But she and her friend, she's like, come on, come on. She climbs over some rocks, and they come into a clearing in the woods where Suki and the others are now watching the, actual Kyoshi warriors at this point in the stories do their training. And we get revealed that Suki's best friend is named Mingxia, Mingxia, and she says they're doing special training. We got to be quiet. And so Mingxia wants to know like what's so special about this training that they're doing. So the Kyoshi warriors, they take out their fans, they kind of fold them up, and they do their meditation Kyoshi style. And Mingxia's like, but don't you have to sort of be like sit down and be quiet to do that? But no, they do more of a kind of martial arts sequence here that still has kind of elements of meditation to it. So it's a bit more of an intense type of meditation. So they open up the fans here and they say all together, focus together as one, and it's this really sort of intense moment where like all of the girls watching the Kyoshi Warriors train are like incredibly impressed seeing the the leader of the Kyoshi Warriors and the others in action here. So just a really nice setup scene for Suki here to show that she's always, since she was young, been interested in the Kyoshi Warriors. It's also showing that she's kind of like the leader of her group of friends because she's bringing them over to watch something she's already seen before. Just really nice scene here. Such a pleasant surprise because they didn't put this in any of the marketing that there was Suki flashback in it. We'd maybe speculated that it might be something that they did, but they didn't directly say it, given that it's like a third or so of the book. So, Greg, what are your thoughts on this opening couple of pages of Suki's backstory here?
I really like having this sort of, younger flashback of Suki and her friends and just sort of seeing them looking up to, the older Kyoshi warriors at that point in time and just, how much influence it has on them in general. And, that's something that you see, reflected on and on as they do through the flashbacks. And yeah, it definitely isn't something that they mentioned in sort of the marketing material, which I don't know. I don't know if that was a little bit of a misstep there, because I think that definitely would have, piqued more people's interest in it if they did know of that. But I guess at the same time, I can also see why you would hold it back a bit. But I don't know. It seems to me like flashbacks are like a key thing of the sort of like alone type of stories that we get in some form or fashion. Some of them don't go as far back as this, and some of them do. But I think that's definitely something that they could have leaned on just because, as we said, we probably thought that it would have some to some degree. Now, we might not have known as much as it actually does have, but, it's something that you would sort of expect.
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting that reflecting on it now, I feel the cover probably should have been Suki and then visually show some look at the flashback, show a younger Suki or something like that, rather than having the spirit of Kyoshi, which is like a spoiler for the very end of the book, where like the speculation coming into this was like, is Suki going to be visited by the spirit of Kyoshi? Like, it seems a weird thing to spoil that big moment. So, in that sense, I feel they kind of got it wrong a little bit because I noticed a certain group of fans disappointed that this book, in its sort of flashback sequences, didn't have like Kyoshi flashback that featured like Rangi and stuff like that. Now, I don't really agree with that because it's like whoever said the book was going to focus on all that sort of stuff. But because they didn't say Suki flashbacks were going to be a thing, I suppose you sort of opened the door with the Kyoshi spirit to like, well, they probably won't have Kyoshi spirit appear before Suki, so it has to be a story about Kyoshi, and that could include these characters. But that's all I think. Like, what if, what could be, but we'll get to that stuff as we go on. But the flashback continues, and so everyone is amazed. They thought it was beautiful what they just watched, and Suki says, "When I grow up, I'm going to be just like them." And Mingjia says, "We know you only tell us every day," but she's like, "Hey, you want to be a Kyoshi warrior too." Mingjia then says, "Hey, I got something for us. I hid it here. Steamed buns." And so they eat these steamed buns together, and they all thank Mingjia for getting it. And she just says, "Anything for my sisters." And suddenly, Oyaji appears before them, and it's just like, some steamed buns have gone missing from the village communal kitchen. Do you girls know anything about them? And so it's revealed that Mingjia actually stole these steamed buns for everyone. But they're all like, no, we didn't, we don't have them. So he knows they did it because they basically have like crumbs, I suppose, all over them. And he says, "I'm disappointed that you would lie to me, Suki, and in front of your sisters, all of whom want to be future Kyoshi warriors. Well, since you won't tell me which one of you stole the buns, all of you will scrub the kitchen as punishment." And so they all agree to this. They won't tell on each other, sisters forever, and they all kind of reiterate this. So this group is completely in unison here, together forever. just a really nice scene. You're getting to see Oyaji again, and just I suppose the different dynamic between like Suki as being more of the leader, Mingxia as the more kind of maybe adventurous one. Um, she's I think a really well done sort of minor character in this book who actually has a decent amount of depth here. So yeah, just seeing this one little incident when they were quite young before they'd ever started their training. Very cool to see. But what are your thoughts on the end of this flashback sequence?
Yeah, it definitely shows the depths of the bonds that they have from being very young and growing up together. And, that's just something that goes through all the flashback scenes that, eventually leads to, some issues later on, just in terms of their bonds and being together, which, eventually things do sort of work out. But, it's a nice sort of starting place to show how they all, sort of acted together in the beginning.
Yeah, because the big theme is like of this book is basically community. So you're seeing the super strong, super loyal community. They would never betray each other as part of the Kyoshi Warriors, and that's going to be contrasted with the prison, which has already been set up of like you're going to have to like scrounge and like fight against the other prisoners to get what you need, and then immediately we cut to Suki's arrival, like actually at the prison. So she's put in her cell here. Um, and it's obviously just a box. She's got a little bit of space, she's got a kind of bunk just there, but there's nothing in the room. All she can do is sort of do her training, practice. So we see Suki do the Kyoshi style meditation, focus together as one. She does her kind of martial arts poses. She doesn't have a fan here, but she just does it sort of hand to hand and ends up by punching the wall because it's a small area. And she kind of thinks like, hey, is this loose? Not quite. But it puts an idea in her head that like, oh, maybe some of these places might be loose. So she slumps to the ground and notices that under her bed there's a little kind of weed growing out of it, and she's like, is that a dumpling weed? So she picks this up, and we get a tiny little flashback scene here, just 3 panels showing a flashback to where the girls were told. Oyaji said they'd be growing around here where the ground is rocky and hard. What plant grows in such terrible conditions? It's dumpling weed. But yeah, they have to bring as much of it as they can find back to the village. And so here's the explanation for why Suki is familiar with this plant, which grows in rough terrain, including the boiling rock. So she says, a piece of Kyoshi Island out here at the end of the world, as she kind of rests on her bed. So what are your thoughts on this here? The Suki's arrival in her cell, which the scenes in the cell will become a sort of common thing we go back to regularly.
Yeah, no, it definitely will be. I mean, I think it's a good way, I guess, just in general, of setting up her time in the prison. So, sort of the previous flashback was setting up her when she's younger. This is sort of setting her up in the sort of now time period, and just sort of how she initially reacts to being in the cell, and how it doesn't, completely destroy her spirit as of yet. She still has, some hope, some ability to sort of focus on, what sort of matters to her in the real world. And, having this sort of dumpling weed here is like a initial sort of sign to her that maybe things might not be as bad as they look, at least initially.
Mm-hmm. Next page is Suki queuing up to get her first meal at the Boiling Rock, and we get a really nice sound effect here, blorp, as the slop is put in her bowl. One of the girls complains about this and says, making us eat this slop is torture. Surely the warden doesn't want us important prisoners dropping dead on his watch. And he just says, if you don't like it, don't eat it. And this is where we get the next preview scene that we got before, which is Suki getting to meet this new character here who is Biyu. Not sure if that's the correct pronunciation, it's Biyu, but anyway, here is their introduction. So Suki tries to introduce herself, but Biyu's like, unless you have some food related thing to offer me, I don't really want to talk to you. And she just says, actually I might, because she just found the dumpling weed. So she does introductions first. I'm Suki, and you are? Name's Biyu. What landed you in prison in the first place? I'm the leader of the Kyoshi Warriors, and we get a sort of outsider reaction to what exactly that means. As in some kind of Avatar Kyoshi tribute group. And she explains, no, we're an elite group of women warriors who have devoted their lives to Avatar Kyoshi. We left our home to join the cause against the Fire Nation, and that led us to fight Princess Azula. She won, unfortunately. And so he was like, oh, that's a lot more than I expected. Uh, that's more impressive than what landed me in here, which was that she stole the heart of the son of a high up person in the Fire Nation military. Um, so yeah, the son of a prominent general. The kid's mom didn't take it well that her precious baby had fallen for a known Earth Kingdom thief, so I got dumped here. I learned the hard way to never underestimate the wrath of a Fire Nation mother. And so their conversation continues. You know, I'm sorry you lost your boyfriend, but he was just some guy to BU, of course. So this is where we get introduced to the dumpling weed, which Suki explains they don't look like much, but they're rich in nutrients and tasty as well. They'll help sustain you. And we just get the explanation is that the food they are given is obviously they don't get much food, but it's also not very nutritious, so it makes everyone weak despite being fed. So this food is going to help them, the prisoners who take it, gain some strength. But this kind of gives Suki an idea. But Greg, what are your thoughts on this introduction scene here to BU and just the whole food situation in the Boiling Rock?
Yeah, no, I think this was interesting just to sort of get the setup of the current status of, I guess, the prison in general. And you can definitely get the feeling from the way that all the other characters and sort of the background on that, this is very like sort of like everyone definitely has like no energy. All the faces are sort of pale and distraught. So, it's pretty obvious to Suki, who, seems to have, just a higher train of thought at this time, or just energy from just being here at the prison, that this is sort of what's going on. But yeah, no, I like the introduction that they have here with BU. I think it's, it's a nice sort of setup for a new character here. It's not like overly involved or anything because, in the end, it's not sort of overall important to the whole overall sort of like Avatar story, but, it's important to Suki's story here in the moment. So, it gives her something to sort of, I guess, at least initially latch on to with this other character.
And I think what's interesting about this scene is that it's not this scene, it's maybe the next couple of pages that is more what makes me go like, oh, yeah, if we need someone who's going to betray Suki, here she is. It makes me reflect back on the little backstory moment, which is kind of like, initially you just think, oh, that's kind of petty of the Fire Nation, that like, just this sort of like weird romantic entanglement she had with someone who happened to be related to someone high up, got her thrown in prison. But then when you see who BU sort of like truly is, you kind of maybe realize that, oh, when we talk about the whole like, broke his heart and stuff like that, it's because like BU probably like really did like put this guy through quite a lot, and it is more of a reflection on her as a character, maybe even more so than just like the Fire Nation just putting anyone they want in prison. So what are your thoughts on that? Like, how early for you in the book did you feel it was like super obvious BU was the one who's going to betray her, and did it make you think differently about this little flashback of like how BU got put here in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, it does seem like this was, I guess, being put in this prison, at least from the way that we've known about it, it does seem like you have to be like either really high profile or you had to do something really bad. And, on the surface level, it doesn't seem like, breaking someone's heart, even if their, mom is sort of high in the Fire Nation, that you would get put here. But it does possibly lead you to think that there was more going on there. Just it's kind of hard to get that from like a two panel flashback story here and a couple other lines of dialogue. So I don't know. I'm not sure how much I can read into that, but just in general, with her being sort of a thief character, I think that sets off a lot of people's sort of radar in terms of her maybe not being the most sort of upstanding person. No, she doesn't come off super mean overall, but I think this is probably like your first alarms, and then I think later on in a couple more pages where you see a little bit more of BU's sort of character and sort of how she responds to certain things is where I think for me at least, it really sort of set off that this is probably not going to go in the best way between the two of them.
So from here on, they go for a walk together. They find more of the weed growing up through the kind of floor. They pick some of them kind of casually, and BU notes that this spot is hidden from the guards so we can see what we have. And they reveal that they found quite a bit, and BU's just like, hey, let's have a meal with them. But Suki says, no, we need to save half for seeds. And she's like, what, do you want to grow a garden in the prison? And Suki has a plan straight away. If we plant some of these seeds, more will grow, and we'll have a stash of food for later. Maybe we can even grow enough to share with the other prisoners. And here's your first real sort of insight into BU being someone who's very different to Suki, and probably another alarm bell going off. The other prisoners, who cares about them? And Suki says, I care about them. You said it yourself, the poor food makes it impossible for them to fight back against the Fire Nation. If we can get everyone better food, there's a chance for pushback against the guards, maybe even a chance for us to escape. Okay, you're the boss. So that's what brings this scene to a kind of close here. And this sort of brings up another element in the book, which we'll get into as the scenes progress, which is Suki as a leader is obviously a strong point that she has, but maybe here's the side of she kind of maybe gets a little bit ahead of herself sometimes. She creates a plan without really properly involving the people around her, and that BU's just kind of like, okay, you have the food, I'll go along with this for now, and doesn't really ask for her like opinion on the plan as such here. So it's kind of the start of a few things here, including like, oh yeah, BU is not at all on the same wavelength as Suki with regards to caring about the other people here. But what are your thoughts on these two pages?
Yeah, no, I mean, I wonder if it's the care or if it's just a sort of general sense of Suki in general, just in terms of her, having the leadership and, she's always been around people that have more or less, respected her opinion and have taken that, with the, value that it's probably worth. Whereas here's a different dynamic that she might not be, obviously as familiar with. So, it's something, I guess, maybe of a learning process, which I think is definitely something that she does learn by the end of the book, unfortunately. But yeah, I mean, I guess here it definitely seems like BU is sort of, a one for all type of character, just in terms of, her being a thief and that sort of being why she landed up here in the first place. But, Suki is trying to do, what seems to be the best thing, which is what you would expect from her and her character.
Then we cut to another flashback sequence. So we see that Suki and the other girls are now in training as Kyoshi warriors. So they do that here. They do the kind of focus together as one training meditation. And then afterwards, we see they're just in their normal kind of Kyoshi Island gear. How did training go for you today, Mingjia? Really well, except for that one part where I dropped my fan. If only our Kyoshi warrior training would help with the battle that we're facing now. Do you know how low our food reserves are? They're almost gone. The island's harvests all failed this year. We might not have enough to get through the winter. People are going to starve. And so Suki says, we'll have to find a way to make ends meet. We always do. Mingjia suggests we could open the island's borders, buy supplies from other nations. But Suki says no, Avatar Kyoshi wouldn't want us to do that. She removed us from the mainland for a reason. And Mingjia says, Avatar Kyoshi never could have predicted we'd be facing famine and starvation. You have to ask the island leaders to reach out for help. Remaining isolated means our people will suffer. No, there's another way. And this is where Suki remembers the dumpling weed. I remember gathering these vegetables when we were younger. They're nutritious and they grow all over the island's north side. We've got to tell the others. We're going to get through this together, Mingjia. And Mingjia is just kind of like, yeah, together. Which is, it meant to, I think, be a sort of contrast to the scene just like 2 or 3 pages ago where BU just says like, okay, you're the boss. Like she just goes along with it. Suki just went off on a plan without really, properly considering what everyone else was thinking. So there's actually a lot to discuss here. So the first one, I suppose, is just the world building reveal here that we didn't quite know before, and that is that Kyoshi Island is isolationist. And this gets like doubly confirmed as we go through the other flashback sequences, but that it is a thing that Kyoshi decided for the island that they are not really meant to deal as such or trade with the other nations. So they're facing a famine here, starvation, but there's an unwillingness to actually ask other places for help here. Um, so instead, they search for these kind of dumpling weeds to kind of get them through the famine. Um, I thought this was a really interesting reveal in that it makes sense with the idea that, yeah, Kyoshi basically let Shin the Conqueror do everything that he did until he came for Yokoya. Then she split it off from the mainland as a way to, you know, you're not coming over here. We're not part of that anymore. But that she then went as far as to be like, okay, in response to that, we are now no longer part of the Earth Kingdom. We're not part of this anymore. We'll fend for ourselves. That's the way Kyoshi Island is and has been for all this time. That is kind of new to me. You sort of got the idea that they are a bit isolated, just with regards to how they handled, Team Avatar arriving there. Um, but just it being directly confirmed like this, I thought was actually a cool reveal. But what are your thoughts on that? The island being confirmed to be sort of like they practice isolationism.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it definitely is an interesting bit of world building in general, just to have it sort of confirmed. I mean, it did feel to me in general that they were, for whatever reason, via Kyoshi or just because of how they've developed themselves, away from the main land, that they've always been in pretty isolation. And it doesn't seem like, at least from what we saw during the series, that, it was pretty rare or someone would have a reason to actually go there. And since I guess despite, the whole war and everything, that probably made, more or less, not having any reason for like the Earth Kingdom to actually like even bother to sort of, deal with them at all. Like, they're just there doing their own thing until, of course, the war, I guess, probably eventually would get there, which is, of course, what comes up later on in discussions with the group here. But yeah, no, it is a nice little bit here that I feel that, it was something that I guess was probably pretty much assumed, but it's nice to have it in sort of a more concrete form.
And it's interesting because I saw some people kind of going like, is this kind of an error? Because in 104, the reason Zuko found out Aang was on Kyoshi Island is because a girl from Yokoya, from Kyoshi Island, talked to a Earth Kingdom fisherman on Yokoya at the port. So there's clearly some trading that goes on. Um, I don't necessarily think it's a contradiction. I think this is just like I suppose, the reality of like being isolated like this, where like it's more of a case of they don't want to have to rely on the other nations for, stuff that they need. They'll trade their fish because that's their main sort of export to other nations for money, but they won't buy stuff themselves from other nations because that's what seems to be the problem here, is the idea that if they did that, that would show the rest of the world that uh, they need the help of everyone else. And then just, I suppose, the idea that, okay, you're practicing sort of isolationism. It doesn't mean that you just don't trade at all. It's just you're more specific with it. But what are your thoughts on that? Like how this whole dynamic here, Avatar Kyoshi deciding that the place should be isolated, how that works with the idea that we basically know it is they have like a trading port and that fish is at least traded. How does that all work together?
Yeah, no, that is true. Because I mean, I guess if you're trying to think about it in sort of like official terms, Kyoshi splitting it away from the island, like even though she is an avatar and that does have like a certain weight in the world in general, there's no real like legal bearing, I would think, on that sort of, distinction. Like they're isolating themselves and they're, trying to be as, self-sufficient as they can be. Um, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they have to be, in that sort of way. I guess it seems like the main thing is that they're not trying to rely on the Earth Kingdom in any sort of way for like their general sort of like well-being or their day-to-day doings. Like, they seem, like you said, if they, seem like they're trading with the port that's there, like it's not like it's not like a hidden island or anything like that. Like it's not like it doesn't seem like it's like a secret that no one knows that it exists. It's just that they don't want to deal with anybody and they have their own, forces to at least push away, a temporary like, incursion or something like that. But, it's not like they're a full-blown nation. Like, I don't see them like like the Beifongs and everything over there, where they're, essentially a whole sort of like pseudo nation unto themselves, at least not as, developed as far as that goes. So I don't know, that is an interesting perspective there to sort of think of them as far as, being isolated and isolationist, but still from time to time dealing with, the mainland or at least the villages in the mainland. Like if they were to start dealing with like the proper Earth Kingdom and stuff like that, and
Mm.
they had to deal with like I guess sort of like the taxes and all of those stuff that would come with, then there would be maybe more of an issue there. But that is definitely a good point. In terms of just the politicalness of their island, and I guess that's something that we even see in Korra and in other later comics when the Fire Nation had colonies and how they're trying to do their own thing as well. So it definitely is an interesting point.
Mm, yeah, and the other point is just that like I do think like you said, there's a difference between just them doing a little bit of trade with like local fishermen who happen to come to the port versus a proper trade deal between this specific place in the Earth Kingdom that's super official and Kyoshi Island. This is a more sort of like personal, sort of like they know the local fishermen type thing. They let them come here to fish or trade, versus like them getting involved in what we know as the sort of the bureaucracy of the Earth Kingdom, which is the stuff that Kyoshi really doesn't like. That's what she doesn't want them involved in. Um, so in this case, I actually think it works. Like I don't think there was necessarily too much of a need to clarify, just because I I think even in like real life examples of isolationism, it's not that there's no trade. But anyway, oh yeah, and then I suppose what are your thoughts just on what we get here as I suppose the start of a little bit of a fracture between Suki and Ming-Jia here over their disagreement on how to actually handle how they should help with the famine.
Yeah, no, this is definitely the starts here of just not necessarily like a huge fraction in the group yet. But yeah, Mingwa definitely has, ideas that are sort of sparking here. And I guess over time as, the island has been, separated for, the period of time that it has been, especially on hard times is when you start looking, towards the outside towards things. And, I wonder if they even did, sort of trade and more stuff with the other areas, would they even have, the necessary resources for that to actually work at this time? But yeah, no, it definitely is, something to see here in terms of, their dynamics and how that is meant to, like you mentioned before, reflect on the earlier scenes in the prison.
Hmm. So they all go to find the dumpling weed, and they pick a lot of it. They kind of distribute it out among the villagers, and they get thanked for this. It was a team effort. And Suki says to Mingxia, um, "Didn't I tell you we'd find a way to survive?" But Mingxia says, "I still think Kyoshi Island should open its borders. I don't think it's right for us to hide away in isolation. I'm going to talk to the village leaders about it tomorrow. I hope, I hope you'll support me." And Suki's like, I can't. I'm sorry, Mingxia. It was worth a try. And then we just have a quick sort of montage of her talking to Oyaji, basically, and him just being like, nope, and her being on her own to propose this, like, change to how the village, the island, sort of does business. And Suki sort of watches on from the background as Mingxia's idea sort of fails in front of the leader. Um, and I also think this fits with like Oyaji, that like Oyaji as the leader of this village on Kyoshi Island, he's the guy who's super like Kyoshi is the best, so of course he would always back up. No, Kyoshi said to do this. I'm not going to go against that. When we got through this situation here, whereas he acknowledges that sort of Suki is the leader of that group, so if Suki was here, he might have listened a little bit more. And this is just, I suppose, Suki kind of feeling like, oh, have I just betrayed her a little bit here by not backing her up? that she truly believes in this, whereas I'm just going along with the kind of expectations of the village and so on. So I think it's an interesting one in that it doesn't. This isn't like a breaking of their friendship as such, but it's just for Suki, who's this character who doesn't typically encounter like struggles like this. This is a really nice scene to see her, you know, maybe mishandle a situation and how she deals with the sort of what happens based on this. So before we get to the sort of scene of Mingjia leaving, what are your thoughts on this? Mingjia still going ahead to talk to Oyaji about this.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely shows just the strength of her idea, and just in terms of, this, possibly could maybe happen again, and just sort of, how the village might ha be helped from this. And it seems like her idea is in like the best interest of the town, and it's also just sort of possibly in line with her own interests as we see later on here. But yeah, it definitely is sort of a moment for Kiyoshi here leading into the next scene where she definitely feels like, this is something that she might not have taken the right stance on, possibly.
And so we cut to I guess it's just later on that day, Mingjia just decides that okay, if they're not gonna do anything here, I'm gonna have to go. So Suki's like, "Are you really going to leave? You're a Kyoshi warrior. We've known each other since we were kids. We're sisters." And Suki's kind of beginning to cry a little bit here, but Mingjia just says, "We are, but I can't turn my back on the world, the way Kyoshi wants us to. There are people out there that I want to meet, experiences I want to have. Kyoshi separated us from the rest of the world, but surely she didn't mean for us to stay that way forever. I have to go. And I'll miss you so much. I'll miss you too. I love you." And she heads off on her own little boat. And it's this emotional moment where, like, the sisters forever, one of them has gone off to sort of seek more freedoms than the island can offer, feeling that that's becoming a bit of a thing that's holding the island and everyone on it back a little bit. And she, she was the one who stole the buns before. She's already a little bit more rebellious and free than the others, and it makes sense why she'd be the one to sort of go out on her own and sort of show the others the way, as we'll sort of see in the next flashback scene. But I really like this, and again, it's an emotional kind of moment here that, in Suki's backstory, she had this moment where she had to say goodbye to her best friend because of this, disagreement effectively that they had. They left on, good terms, but they didn't really address the kind of argument, I suppose, to a degree. So what are your thoughts on this goodbye scene?
It's definitely a very sort of heartfelt scene here, and you definitely can see the emotion on Suki's face here, but it definitely doesn't seem like it's sort of like, and we'll find this later on, sort of like the end of this issue here. It just seems like Minghua just definitely has, wants to have more experiences, like she says here, just in terms of the world. And this doesn't seem like it has anything to do, per se with like the state of the world or the war or just, the mainland versus Kyoshi Island. It just seems like it's, personal to her, and, sort of just the idea of just the island's ways in general. So no, it definitely is a sad bit of a scene here.
We cut back to the Boiling Rock, and we see one of the other prisoners who is now sort of, I suppose, working with Suki, and everyone is like distracts the guards by just having a bit of a conversation about, giving his best rock to someone. Um, she goes in to meet a guy called Han, and he says, all clear, Suki. We aren't expecting any guards for the rest of the afternoon. Everyone here is on sort of laundry duty, basically. So they actually pull off one of the kind of panels from the wall, revealing that they have this tunnel built into this kind of clear area where they do have a bit of a dumpling weed garden going on. So Biyu and Suki crawl through, and it's only been 2 weeks, but they have, a decent amount of plants that they've got their extra food supply here. And as Suki notes, it's all here right under the Fire Nation's nose. But they're warned that the warden is coming for a surprise inspection. They need to get out here like as soon as possible. So Han helps them all, to hide some of them in the bags of laundry, because they're not really meant to be here at this point. He talks to the warden, and he says, "I hope you're taking pride in your work cleaning the uniforms of your betters." Outside these walls, you were rebels and miscreants, not fit for the Fire Nation society. But here you have the chance to make yourself useful. This place is your home now. No one outside this prison cares enough to rescue you, and escape is impossible. So take pride in your work at the Boiling Rock Prison. It's the last thing you'll ever do. So we note that Suki just looks on at this guy is like, this is her enemy. This is the person opposing everything she wants to do as he walks off. They get out, and I suppose you see BU in the background, like looking on at the warden of like, she's got her first close-up look at the guy who runs the prison, and she's kind of, some stuff is going through her head. So she thanks Han for hiding us, knowing that it was risky, that Suki's actually managed to get people to kind of put their necks on the line for her and the plan and so on. So he's thankful that, you know, she gave them the food. So that's what's going on here. And they say, if we're ever going to get out of this place, we might have to fight. Do you feel strong enough to do that? Maybe someday. And she says, good, I'm sure it will be soon, as they go back out as if nothing has happened here. So for now, the secret garden is a secret, and there's more of a group that is now working with them to kind of keep the garden going. So again, a scene showing that here is Suki's community. We knew about this from the marketing, so here's the kind of group that she's now formed. They're all working together, helping each other to go undercover, and so far it's working, but there's already a little a few hints of something about to happen. But Greg, what are your thoughts on the secret garden here?
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't know, it's nice that they're able to somehow, sort of have this the function inside of the prison here, and I guess it's just like right inside of the blind spot from, I guess, the previous scene where we saw sort of like the upper angle of the guards on top of, which I guess is sort of like a inner tower or something like that. So it's nice to see how that works here. But yeah, I don't know. It was interesting to get to see the warden again, and just to see like his character is just as on point as it was sort of in the series, where he's still, super unlikable, super annoying. And you can definitely get that idea from the way that Suki's reacting to him in general. So no, I think all of that definitely sort of aligns right here. And yeah, it is nice to see that there is, sort of a group that has formed here around Suki. So, this still all reinforces her idea of, sort of a community that is sort of, working together, towards some, goal, which right here, their goal is, of course, to eventually be strong enough to get out of there. So, no, it's nice to see that this is, her focus, and that's where, they're trying to head towards.
Mm-hmm. And here is the scene where they probably reveal what's about to happen in the book a little bit too on the nose, but we'll go through it here. So Biyu says to Suki, it's crazy how the other prisoners listened to you. I thought you were done for when the warden walked in, but they actually risked their necks to hide us. Working together could be beneficial for all of us. The other prisoners know that. When we escape, we'll do it together. Biyu says, I've never been much for other people. I usually just look out for myself, but I'm starting to see the advantage of having friends around. Better eats, for one thing. And Suki says, it isn't about advantages, it's about community. If we stand together, all of us have a better chance of making it out of this place. It isn't about using other people to make sure we survive. You understand that, right? And then BU basically looks right at the camera effectively and says, sure, Suki, I get it. Community for all of us. And it's so clear that, like, oh, okay, the whole I'm out for myself thing, she's going to see the first opportunity to go against this and go ahead with it. So, yeah, it's very on the nose. I don't mind it too much just because it is a one-shot book, and it was going to be difficult to have a sort of surprise someone who betrayed them. So you kind of had to just do it this way, because the character arc you're ultimately going for is, what if Suki forms a relationship with it, and then is betrayed by someone who has basically the exact opposite views on connections with people than she does. And you had to do it this way, I suppose, as unfortunate it is that it's just so obvious what's about to happen. But the result of this, like what it puts Suki through, and what it allows you to do from a writing perspective with Suki, I think is kind of worth it, even though it's not ideal. But Greg, what are your thoughts on this Bu Suki scene?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely does, hone in the point of just sort of, community versus self-interest and how that plays out in, I guess, sort of this prison setting here, which is, it is one that Suki is, quite unfamiliar with. She's never really experienced it in any form that we know of course. So no, I mean, yeah, it is definitely, I think if you weren't keyed in on it previously, this definitely would be the one that, it would sort of be pretty obvious that something's going to go down here. And the other prisoners from the little bit that we get of them, it definitely doesn't seem like they're the ones that are going to be sort of on the betrayal side of things here. But no, I mean, I guess it works. I don't know if you could have done it a bit differently and not have it be quite so obvious, or if it more was like sort of a group betrayal, or sort of, someone's put under pressure and that actually in order to say something, maybe that would have been something that potentially could have worked better. I don't know, but it definitely, it gets to the end point where it needs to be, I guess.
Hmm. Then we go to the next flashback scene, which is actually set like immediately after episode 4 of Avatar. So this is right after the Warriors of Kyoshi. They're out here cleaning up the town after all the damage that was done by Zuko's arrival. And we get a conversation between Kyoshi and her other friend, whose name is Jie. Ga. I'm not really sure about the pronunciation on that. So what a mess. If this is what happens when the Fire Nation comes to Kyoshi Island, Avatar Kyoshi was right to remove us from the mainland. And Suki's like, I've been thinking about that. The world is in the middle of a war, and people are suffering. Meanwhile, we've refused to help those in need. Um, Her friend says, we aren't refusing to help people, we're following Kyoshi's mandate to remain separate from the rest of the world. Suki says, and I don't think we should anymore, not while the Fire Nation is out there destroying other homes and villages. And GA says, Suki, you're starting to sound like Ming Jia. The Avatar himself came to our island, and GA says, and brought the Fire Nation who burned down our village. Suki then says, Mingjia left us because she didn't believe we should remain separate from the world. During the famine, she told us to open our gates and ask neighboring communities for help. People nearly died because we refused to. She was right to reject Kyoshi Island's isolationism. I didn't understand it then, but I do now. The Avatar could have hidden himself away. He could have refused to involve himself in the world's problems, but he didn't. He went back out there to help people. And the argument here is, it's his job to help people. And Suki says, it should be our job as well. She says, we're Kyoshi warriors. We spent our whole lives training for this. But the argument is that we train so we can protect the island. You just saw what happened when the Fire Nation came. We're needed here. We're needed out there too. So she says, I'm leaving Kyoshi Island. I want to follow in the Avatar's footsteps. I believe Avatar Kyoshi would be understanding. I'm your leader, but I won't order any of you to come with me. Some of you should stay here to protect the island, but those who want to join me, and so a few of the girls say, I'll come, I believe in the Avatar too, I'll join you, me too, but GA doesn't agree to it. So Suki now sets off on a boat with some of the other Kyoshi warriors, and is asked, did you ever think that this would happen? No, I really didn't. I'm glad we're together. Of course, we're sisters, sisters forever. So now Suki and some of the others are following basically what Mingjia sort of set up from before, but it's still in line with what Oyaji said to Sokka in like 205, that Suki was inspired by, the Avatar and his friend's arrival to kind of go out and do something here. So I like this, that it's not just she met the Avatar that inspired her. That's a part of it, but it has this whole other aspect to it too, of this on top of what Ming Jia was talking about, is why Suki eventually decides that she also needs to go out and help. So I really, really like this specific kind of flashback sequence here. So what are your thoughts on this post 104 kind of moment here?
Yeah, no, this is definitely really important to give extra context to Suki and the other Kyoshi warriors that did choose to leave and sort of, go out and help the Earth Nation and, just the Earth Kingdom in general, just in terms of the war and just, they have been training for this for quite a while and their skills that can be used in other places besides just the island as well. And, even if Kyoshi, did mean for the island to pretty much be away from the world, no, it doesn't mean that they're necessarily have to be, that's not the only thing that Kyoshi did. Kyoshi was the Avatar, so of course she was involved in sort of worldly affairs in general. So, that the idea that, some of them would, sort of split off and actually go and help on the war effort where, it is, you know, as we know, pretty a dire thing. I think it works here, and it's not all of them that go. There's Gia who does finally does see that the island does need protection, which of course it does. Of course, this was sort of maybe a particular circumstances where the war was brought to them, where otherwise it wouldn't have been brought to them. Um, so it might not be as much of a thing going forward. But who knows as far as the war continues on and on. And I think that's part of sort of the reasoning that Suki is seeing here that there is a bigger thing going out there that they probably need to be involved with it to some degree.
Yeah, and even though they don't go into it, but it's just that idea of like she's just recently met and kind of had a good relationship with Sokka, who's this kind of not particularly skilled warrior who himself has left his own home without the skills and is still trying to help. And if he can do that, she can do that as well, type thing. So I definitely like that. That is, even though they don't directly mention Sokka here, there's an aspect to that as well. But anyway, we cut back to the boiling rock. It's mealtime again, so here we sort of get to see how they use the kind of dumplings. So she hands them to this guy named Ching, I think it is, Qing, and she's like, put them in your food, don't let the guards see. But he's a little bit too obvious about it, and they're like, wait, have you got contraband there? And they're like, oh, I'm such an idiot, like, I told them to be careful. The guards have been all over us lately, they know something's going on. So they get to see that there is some contraband here. This sort of starts a bit of a small kind of a riot here. The prisoners begin to sort of rise up against the guards. We're people. We deserve better treatment. And the guard says, "Sit down, all of you. Sit and eat your food, or else face the consequences." One of the guards gets a pile of sludge basically in the face, which starts a bit of a scuffle here. The guard does say, "It is disgusting. Maybe they have a point. It smells like rotten platypus bear eggs." And so Suki's like, "Yes, we're going to fight back." Everyone dives into action except Biyu, who's like right behind you as she like runs in the opposite direction. But Suki charges right into action, her usual sort of acrobatic style of fighting, dives over a table, kicks one person in the back of the head, takes one guy's feet out from underneath him, knocks another guy down. Someone slips on the kind of slop. But the second the firebending comes out, the fight sort of comes to an end because she realizes that, like, okay, she's skilled and she has the support of some kind of prisoners who are kind of up for it now, but without other skilled people around her, it's going to be a bit of a problem. So this small uprising is shut down here. She's forced to surrender, and they're told, all of you will spend time in solitary as punishment for disobedience. And Suki is taken away as she watches Biyu also taken away, but sort of in the opposite direction. So Suki is now put in an even smaller cell where she can't really do her Kyoshi meditation exercises at this point. So this is going to be, I suppose, a turning point here. So what are your thoughts on this small scale riot here that happens at mealtime?
Yeah, no, it definitely is on a scale here, and I don't know. I mean, it's interesting because they sort of mess up, sort of trying to hide the extra food here, and then they do sort of get into a scuffle here. But you know, like you said, without Suki having a good amount of people to actually fight with. There's not much that they can go with this. And I don't know, the one thing I did wonder about this is sort of where were the more, I guess, the firebending prisoners, since we do know that there are some there, but maybe they're, sort of isolated or something because of how they set up things in the prison, which would kind of make sense if they actually have, those sort of, structures in place here. So I don't know, it is really sort of short-lived here. They are just sort of overwhelmed here pretty quickly, despite being in better health than they were previously.
Hmm. The door to her cell is open, and she's told that the warden wants to see her. So she's brought before the warden, and he's like, "Ah, Suki, isn't it? Leader of the famous Kyoshi warriors, captured and personally sent to the Boiling Rock by Princess Azula. What do these look like to you?" As he shows her the dumpling weeds, that is what she's been using. But she just says, "Nothing. Nothing, hmm? To me, they look a great deal of something. To me, these tiny legumes look like they're the reason why my prisoners have been so willful lately. A delicate balance is needed to maintain a prison as complicated as the Boiling Rock, and it seems you are doing all that you can to upset that balance." And she just says, "I don't know what you're talking about." He slams his fist down and says, "Stop lying to me. We found your garden. Did you really think that merely growing vegetables would change things on the Boiling Rock? What did you think would happen? That the other prisoners would rise up and miraculously overthrow their captors?" And she says, "It was a chance to build community, to support each other as human beings. Maybe give us the chance to escape this place someday." And he's like, "Escape? Some little weeds would give you the power to fly your way out of the Fire Nation's most impenetrable prison? You can't keep us starved and intimidated forever." And this is where he says his main point here. "Did you know you were betrayed?" And this actually sort of hits her here. She's like, "What?" But then it's like, no, 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 you're lying. "One of your own, one of those fellow human beings you've been risking your neck to feed, came to me and gave you up. Your garden, your secret passage to the laundry room, all of your tools, all gone now. It's a common mistake coming to the Boiling Rock prison and thinking you've made friends here, friends who would make surviving a lot easier, but you have no friends here. You're completely alone. At the Boiling Rock prison, it's every fool for themselves. Take her back to solitary." So, big scene here with the warden. I think he's actually really well written, very accurate to the way we saw him in the episodes. And of course, he has that one little moment right at the end to sort of twist the knife. The thing that actually gets through to her. Like, a lot of it is just like, my prison is impenetrable. That's all I care about. No one will ever escape. But he knows, like, oh, I can get through to you this way. You were betrayed. You're talking about community. How do you feel that someone, one of these people, they ruined this? And he just lets her sort of ponder what could happen, who it could be, and a pretty effective use of a character you just love to hate. But what are your thoughts on Suki's conversation with the warden?
Yeah, no, he does do it in a really good way. That's really unfortunate for Suki in this instance here. But yeah, I mean, the whole idea of her being betrayed goes against, as of now, all the things that she sort of has grown up with and stands for. So the fact that she's coming to face with this is just something that she probably wasn't prepared for, and as we see later on, is something that definitely brings her to a pretty low point, just in terms of just how she's been faring so far at the prison. It seemed like things were on a rise up until this point.
Hmm. So she's escorted out here, so she's in the kind of like public area. She sees a lot of the other people around, and they're just kind of acting pretty normally. Then she looks up and sees Biyu talking to one of the guards, and she's like wearing different clothing, like better clothing than before, and she seems quite happy, as if like nothing has happened. Like she should also be in solitary, but she's not. And Suki like has her doubts of like, is this what's happened? She doesn't know for sure yet, but pretty much has an idea it was her. So she's put back in her cell. She says, "I'm not alone. I'm not." She kneels down, is like, "I'm not alone," and we go into another flashback. So, yeah, this is Suki kind of realizing that, oh, the first person she spoke to in here, who she's been having these discussions with, uh, this person has betrayed her here. Why would she do this? Like, this is Suki who herself believes so strongly in community, sisters forever. She's never had someone do this to her before, as now is now having to deal with the fact that someone did just do that, and it's a big moment for Suki to have to deal with this betrayal, and I do like that we get to see her struggle with this a lot. But what are your thoughts on these kind of 2 pages here?
Yeah, no, they're a quick set of pages here, and yeah, it really is just the beginning of her struggle here and her having doubts. And it seems like even when she's initially released here, some of the other prisoners aren't really like making like eye contact with her or anything like this. And yeah, seeing Bu sort of up in the distance, sort of isolated but in better spirits, definitely sort of starts her thinking process towards what really did happen.
hmm And the flashback is sort of it's I suppose meant to be the example of like, no, in the past, like even when she's maybe felt that there's been issues, those bonds are so strong that they'll remain there always. And so we get now a sort of a pre Serpent's Pass flashback sequence here. So we're at Full Moon Bay. Suki is here, like we saw her when the group encountered her again. She's kind of, helping people here with the tickets, to the refugees getting on the ships to Ba Sing Se. And then she spots Mingxia. Suki, is that you? Mingxia, it's so great to see you. I can't believe it's actually you. What are you doing here? I'm helping with security and providing safe passage for refugees to reach Ba Sing Se. You're right in front of me, but I almost can't believe it. You really left Kyoshi Island? Not just me, most of the other Kyoshi warriors left as well. We're all here trying our best to help others. So the obvious question here is, Mingxia asked, what changed your mind? The Avatar came to our village, and it's a long story. In the end, we decided we needed to stop isolating ourselves. We wanted to help people outside of Kyoshi Island. I'm glad to hear that. And Suki says, I'm sorry I didn't support you before when you wanted to open up the island's borders. And she's very like sad. She thinks this is going to be bringing up sort of bad news here, but Mingxia's just like, it's all right. We're both here now, aren't we? There are some people I want you to meet, and so she just drags Suki happily over to a group of people she's traveling with, and she says, "These are my friends, Don Don, Fen Fang, and Peng. Everyone, this is Suki." And then she introduces, and this is my girlfriend, Mei Lin. Mei Lin, this is my Kyoshi warrior sister, Suki. I've heard so much about you. It's great to finally put a face to the stories. What stories? Nothing too damaging to the Kyoshi Warriors' reputation, I promise. And so we just get the idea of like, the war has made everything difficult, which is why we're going to Ba Sing Se. They'll feel safer behind the walls. And the ferry is going to be leaving soon. You should go then. It was great to meet all of you. And then she says, she just grabbed Mingxia just before they leave and says, Mingxia, I never thought I'd see you again. But Mingxia just says, I always knew we'd find each other. Somehow we're sisters, aren't we? Sisters. And so they have a really nice hug to just highlight that what seemed to be a issue between the two of them over how they handled that situation in the past isn't really, and that they're still sisters forever, even after all that's happened. So just a nice scene like that. This, you get the impression like this happened like the day before she met Team Avatar again. It's a kind of cool scene to fit in. But what are your thoughts on this flashback scene?
Yeah, no, I agree. It definitely is a really cool scene that, for all intents and purposes, seems to slot in really well with what we know of what Kyoshi was doing and the other Kyoshi warriors. So, no, seeing Suki reunite with Minghua here, I think, is really nice because, they did sort of leave from each other on sort of like a sad note. But here you can see that Minghua, anything that happened before was like water under the bridge here. She's just happy to introduce her to the people that she's been traveling with and just sort of, hear a little bit of the story that she gets here of, how everyone is doing now. So no, I thought this was really nice that they included this in order to sort of follow up on the earlier flashback scene.
Yeah, and it's interesting because like this is like the last kind of Mingxia scene in the book, and it's to the point where I'm kind of like, I'd actually really like to get more content with her in terms of like, whether it be like having a comic with Suki set somewhere in the comic timeline where she goes to see her again and we see what they got up to. Like, they obviously got to Ba Sing Se and were in there when everything happened, and like, what were they up to in the middle of like the Fire Nation taking over Ba Sing Se, it then being taken back, and Uh, I'd like to see Mingjia kind of just come back into things again. Um, but yeah, I suppose, do you have any thoughts on that? Like, this is the end of Mingjia in the book. Like, what were your overall thoughts on her as a character?
Yeah, no, overall, I think it worked really well as far as like one of Suki's sort of close friends from back in the day. And yeah, I think it would be interesting just to see if we get another story with Suki and like, just sort of Team Avatar in general in the future. It would be cool just to see, I don't know, just to see more about, sort of Suki's relations with other people and just sort of, even just sort of with Kyoshi Island and how things are sort of faring in the future, I think that might be an interesting, sort of like side story to actually go
Mm.
on.
Yeah, or even just like a more fun thing of just like Mingjia introduced Suki to her girlfriend here, like how Suki introduced Mingjia to Sokka and stuff like that, just to see what happens. But anyway, we cut back to the Boiling Rock 2 weeks later. So Suki's been in solitary for 2 weeks. Your punishment is over. And we see immediately that Suki walks out of prison and she's kind of annoyed, angry. There's like bags under her eyes. You can tell that being alone in that small cell has had an impact on her, and she's kind of a bit on edge here. So Han says, Suki, they finally let you out. Where's Biu? She's not in the general population anymore. She got herself a fancy room and full privileges, including not having to eat prison slop anymore. And Suki says, and I wonder what she said to get these privileges. Anyone have a guess? She's like, never mind, we all know. So she's just sitting by the wall and then notices BU up on one of the sort of outlying kind of platforms around the prison. So we sort of have an idea what's going to happen here. So Suki, obviously very annoyed here, charges up and basically does her Spider Suki thing where she just gymnastics, acrobatics all the way up the wall, stealthily, of course. And so as BU goes into a room, Suki follows her through the door as well, and like grabs her, kind of slams her into the ground here, and says, "Stop yelling! There's no guards. It's just you and me." Oh wow, you don't look so good. Solitary's hard on a person, huh? Don't pretend you care about me, you traitor. You gave up the garden to the warden. Well, yeah, a girl has to survive. So that's her kind of reasoning behind all of this. What about Han and Ching and the others? What about our plan to build up strength so we could fight back? And then here's a key line here. That wasn't our plan. It was yours. I went along with you because at first you seemed smart and you had food. But after that fight in the cafeteria, I don't need to deal with that heat. That fight was our fellow prisoners standing up to the Fire Nation, and you betrayed them. Don't you have any loyalty to the people you're living alongside in this awful place? People who risked themselves to help grow that garden? That's the difference between you and me, Suki. You need to be part of a community. I don't. All I need is to get through my sentence at the Boiling Rock in the most comfortable way possible. And thanks to you and your secret garden, I'm now best friends with the warden. No offense, but if I'm going to choose between you and the warden, I'm going with him. It's his prison after all. How could you? Come on, Suki, did you really think that we were friends? That I was one of your Kyoshi warrior sisters? Please. And so she goes to just walk off here. But we'll come back to that in a second. But what are your thoughts on post-solitary Suki here in this scene?
Yeah, no, you definitely see a lot of the rage and all of the pain of being stuck in solitary confinement. I think they do a really good job of just showing the emotion on Suki's face throughout this whole section here of just sort of how upset she is with BU and her sort of portrayal here. And yeah, it does really get across the point here that BU was really just only looking out for herself throughout this whole time. She never really got the idea of the sense of community or sort of the prisoners working together, which just sort of inherent in her character, which is just sort of I guess a character flaw that Suki couldn't see through in the beginning.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, just that idea of like her pointing out it wasn't our plan, it was yours, and it's just a different way of referencing the whole idea of like how Suki went ahead with her plan and not Ming Jia's plan earlier on, or so on. That this is another case of like just going along with it. Everyone should be a part of community, but realizing that no, here's someone who really only cares for herself, and that she went along initially because the just the food, keeping the food secret was kind of a safe kind of plan, but the second stage of it, planning the fight back, be viewed as being too risky, and that by betraying them, it gave her the path to actually being comfortable. So, yeah. So this is a big one here. Obviously, we just ended that scene with Biu saying that, like, did you really think we were friends? Or Kyoshi warrior sisters, please? Like, mocking that idea of community. Suki charges at Biu in a anger here, really heavy anger, grabs her and holds her out basically over the platform. So like if she drops her here, she's going to fall all the way down because again, Suki's hopped a bunch of floors up. So this is like a 3-story fall here. So this would probably kill Biu. And Biu starts kind of begging like, no, please don't. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Suki slams her down into the ground here, doesn't throw her over the edge. And then immediately Biu just starts talking again. So it's like that, huh? Just wanted to scare me. Coward. As Suki goes back to her cell, slams the door, and begins to do her meditations again. But what are your thoughts on this scene here of Suki nearly letting her anger kind of go too far?
Yeah, no, this definitely is like right before Suki's lowest point here, because she's really almost willing to do, like one of the unspeakable things that really goes against her sort of core character here, but she doesn't actually do it, and Ryu, who's really just only out it for herself, really just doesn't have anything good to say in this case here. She's just she's really is just sort of only for herself here, and once she sees that the danger is gone, she's pretty much back to her normal sort of self here, and not even sort of asking for any sort of forgiveness here.
And yeah, this is a fantastic moment because just to see this sort of Suki pushed beyond her limits in this moment, we haven't ever really seen that before. Like the only in any way sort of flawed moment from Suki was basically, she lost to Azula, and even that was mostly sort of off screen for the most part. So just seeing her here, like just not knowing how to handle this like person who just does not have at all the same opinions as she does, and should she do this? Should she not? And just realizing that no, I'm not going to kill someone over this. She's in a way not worth it. And just kind of walks off. But it's the aftermath of this that's really, really important here because, yeah, as we go into it here, she's back in her normal cell, so she has the space to actually do her meditation exercises here. So she starts to do the poses. I'm not alone. Focus together. She does the kind of Kyoshi Warrior punches. She remembers herself as the leader of the Kyoshi Warriors. She continues through it. She remembers, her relationship with Ming Jia. Continues on. She remembers heading out to sea with the other Kyoshi warriors. She continues on. She remembers meeting up with Ming Jia again in the Earth Kingdom. And then it stops. She stops, like collapses to her knees and just kind of realizes that, she doesn't finish it. I'm not alone. She kind of realizes she is alone. And as she drops to her knees and begins to cry, she looks up and she is confronted by the spirit of Avatar Kyoshi. And she says, Avatar Kyoshi. And the spirit of Kyoshi says, Suki, your friends love you. They have not abandoned you. You are not alone. And Suki says, how do you know? And Kyoshi just smiles at Suki and then vanishes away. And Suki smiles, wipes the tears away, and sits down, kind of looks up at the ceiling, and like it hasn't fixed everything, but it's like, okay, we have now reached the sort of emotion that Suki was in when Sokka found her for the first time, which was sort of she's on her own. She doesn't look particularly happy, nor does she look particularly sad when we saw her at the Boiling Rock. And we've kind of caught up to that point at this stage. So then we cut outside of the cell, outside of the prison, and a war balloon enters the Boiling Rock, and on it are Sokka and Zuko as we've completely caught up to the events of the Boiling Rock. She is about to be like rescued in the coming days. So that's how they end the book here. So Yeah, Greg, what are your thoughts on Kyoshi's lowest moment followed by this really big moment for her?
Yeah, no, I mean, this definitely just shows you where her mindset was in a really good way for Suki. Just sort of her going through the meditation, like you said, and thinking past, through all the moments of, good examples of, community and sisterhood and everything sort of working out for the better to, realizing that in this sort of case here, it might not actually be, the best of situations here. But then, of course, you get the sort of reveal here of Kiyoshi or the spirit of Kiyoshi appearing to her and sort of giving her at least a little bit of hope here that she hasn't been truly sort of abandoned in this case here, which I think is it's nice to see how they sort of set this up, I guess, a little bit. I mean, I guess it's from the cover you might think that this would have come a lot sooner. But no, I guess, really, these sort of instances really only happen at sort of like the lowest point, and there wasn't really anything up until this point where Suki felt really sort of so low in her just sort of, well-being that this would really sort of, I guess, trigger this. Now, no, are there any sort of like specifics for this or anything like that? No, but I don't know if that's necessarily like needed in this sort of case here. But no, I think this definitely it's a nice way to sort of, I guess, put this in here, and I don't know, it's cool how it does, time up with what we're thinking, of how, Sokka and Zuko are coming here to actually sort of rescue her. So I do like that it has that sort of, segue into that. So you could read this and then, sort of watch the episode and see how that all works together. So, I do like that part of the continuation here.
hmm And yeah, this final scene I think is just really well done. Getting Suki to this moment is kind of what, everyone's been waiting for, to see the emotions of the scene. How do we take such a strong character and get her to the point where she would kind of agree with what all the characters have been saying to her, that you'll be alone in the prison. Azula says it to her, the warden says it to her. BU basically causes it to be this way. And finally, like after she's been remaining strong this whole time, through the meditation, through remembering everything, um, working with her, community here in the Boiling Rock, it all now comes to a head of like what's just happened. The betrayal hits home, and it's this really just moment of accepting like she is alone, and it's a good thing for the character that makes her feel all the more kind of realistic, developed, that she does have these moments where like she can just break down and like not have any clue where to go from here. And then yeah, to follow that up with such a powerful moment, like just the Kyoshi appears before Suki. Um, it's a super strong character moment in that like it's I suppose basically like Suki's like Katara painted lady moment of just a character you don't associate anything spiritual with necessarily. Um, Here something spiritual happens to her, and it's if there's any question about like is Suki like a main character, well here you go. Like you don't get randomly visited by the spirit of Kyoshi if you're not someone very important. That's really impactful, and just like knowing that, yeah, just letting Suki know like you're not alone. Like I know, like your friends do still care for you, and it just gives her that slight little bit of hope that eventually comes true in the coming days. Really like it, and especially just the Sokka Zuko bit to end the book. Um, I suppose this is where we get into the other way of like looking at this scene, because when I first read this, and obviously it was a month before everyone else, so I couldn't discuss this with anyone for like a month. It was like, cool, Suki gets an Avatar Kyoshi scene, but how on earth is this happening? Like, how does this fit in with spirit scenes that we've seen before, past life communication scenes that we've seen before? This seems a bit weird because like what's going on here, because it's very clearly portrayed as it is a spirit form of Kyoshi because there's a blue light around her, kind of blue transparent spirit. That's what's here. The dialogue from Kyoshi seems to suggest that when she says your friends love you, they've not abandoned you, that she knows that for certain. Because Suki asks, "How do you know?" and she smiles. Well, the answer you would obviously have is because, well, I'm a part of Aang, and I know Aang and the others haven't forgotten about you. They think about you often. That's sort of a dynamic. The only problem is that, of course, where is Aang in relation to Suki here? We've not seen many examples of like a past life being projected like so far away from an avatar. We have other examples of it happening with other people, like Tenzin and Aang in the Fog of Lost Souls. But that has a little bit of an out because it's like during harmonic convergence and just spirit stuff is going to happen with that. Um, there's the Zhang Zhang scene in The Deserter, which is probably one of the weirdest spirit scenes in the franchise because it's like some weird spirit vision thing, and Aang isn't aware Roku's doing this, but like Zhang Zhang's having a conversation with the two of them at the same time. Um, this is just hard to explain because either this just happens and Aang is nowhere near Suki, or it's some whole other way of interpreting what actually is going on here. I suppose before we get deeper into the sort of technical points of this, what are your thoughts on this scene from that perspective? I think we've both basically said like it's a really strong character moment and thing for Suki to like get as a scene. But from a sort of more technical point, how do you view like how this works?
That's definitely a really valid point there. I mean, the idea with it having sort of the blue sort of outline, the glow around it makes you think that it's sort of like, sort of a projection spirit from, Aang's, past life that's sort of presenting itself to Suki in this sort of case here. And I do wonder if that is it, although I don't think that's initially how I took it. I think, there's probably a couple different ways. I'm sure many people have different theories, and, I'm sure it could be hand waved as well if you really wanted to. I don't know. I also could see it sort of as more of just like an internal sort of, spirit meditation sort of projection of Kyoshi from, Suki directly in terms of her appearing to her, in terms of just, she did start the whole sort of, Kyoshi sort of meditation thing. It doesn't seem like she went through with the full process. And I don't know, the whole idea of that sort of meditation, I mean, we don't, it doesn't seem like we fully have like an understanding of how it works. But, however it may work, maybe that could be sort of one of the things that's sort of leading towards this sort of projection, or even, it could just be an internal projection of Kyoshi in this moment, in terms of appearing to Suki in order to give her this sort of, bit of help in this sort of instance here. I don't know if it's so connected to the real sort of spiritual presence of Kyoshi's spirit and, via Aang or via the avatar or through the spirit world. I could be believed that it could be, some combinations of the things that actually appears to Suki in this sort of case here, just because of, the connection that Suki does have with Kyoshi, just from being a Kyoshi warrior in the island. No, I could be led to believe that that would be sort of a strong enough bond, even if it's not, directly, a connection where, Suki has like this such of a strong spiritual sense that this is something that, she would be able to do, as we've seen from other characters, like you mentioned with John Jong, or any of the other characters that are more, I guess you could say, spiritually inclined. It could be more along the lines that you said with sort of the Painted Lady and Qatar, where it's just sort of one of those instances where the situation calls for the connection to actually appear to her in some form or fashion. Like I wonder if, if someone else was in this cell, would they also see Kyoshi in this instance here, or is it really just sort of only in Suki's sort of, mindscape that we're actually seeing in this case? How, I guess, how physical is this presence in front of Suki? I guess would be a question to wonder. I mean, bearing on how it actually appears in these scenes, with like sort of the cast glow and all of that
Mm.
stuff.
Yeah, I've seen a few people like make suggestions like along those lines, including that like it's some sort of like a almost like hallucination type thing from Suki. Um, I think this has to be like the spirit of Kyoshi. Like not related to what's really going on with Suki at all, but just this is the spirit of Kyoshi in a similar way that a past life talks to someone else. Because otherwise, if you're saying that this is like, it's not the actual spirit of Kyoshi, but something that sort of Suki made herself, then it's presenting the point that Suki is still alone. She just manufactured a spirit of Kyoshi to tell herself that she's not alone. That really, to me, takes a lot away from the character point that they're going for in the scene, because it's basically saying she is alone because you have to tell yourself you're not alone, kind of type thing. And especially with how quick it sort of happened, like she literally comes to the conclusion that she is alone. I find it weird how she would then herself immediately resolve her own problem with a, projection of spirit of Kyoshi that she kind of made herself. So that's just from like a character writing point of view. I think it like comes across quite badly if it is meant to be interpreted as just Suki, envisioned this herself. So that's why I feel it has to be sort of outside that, whether this is Kyoshi who has like separated herself like from Aang and Rava and come over to say this, or if you have the interpretation that you view all the past lives as being separate spirits and they can act on their own, that is what's happened here. I think it has to be one of those things. I'm obviously much more inclined to go with the theory that it has to all be facilitated through Rava, just because I think that's the way a lot of the scenes work. And then you have, if it's the other way, I think you're playing way too close to the idea of, why is the Avatar the only time we get to see sort of dead people as spirits? Especially if you're saying that the Rava connection isn't there at all. That's why I'd say it's that way. So my interpretation of this is that, as this is happening, like Aang is asleep somewhere else in the Fire Nation, and it's just like the spirit of Kyoshi sort of like projected really without his knowledge, in a kind of similar way to the Zhangjiang scene, I guess a similar way to the Aang Tenzin scene, just over a much bigger, larger distance, because that way you can at least make the argument that, oh, well, the spirit connection between Suki and Kyoshi in this instance is that, well, Suki knows Aang, and Suki also has a connection to Kyoshi just through the Kyoshi warriors, and so, it can work in that way, in the sense that, like, Aang was able to sense that Katara was in danger. Maybe when he was asleep, he could sense that Suki was in emotional turmoil, and it was the Kyoshi aspect of the spirit that went to speak to her. I don't like how the scene makes you sort of have to consider like so many things, and that's a very complicated topic. I did a video on this earlier this week, like going over all of the past life scenes, and it's not exactly consistent scene to scene. Like the Zhangjiang scene makes very little sense compared to this and that. Some of the comics have like portrayed like meditating into the spirit world to speak to an avatar in very weird and different ways. And then, as ever, like early Avatar is especially weird with it, in that Aang's first past life communication is with Fang, and that, like, how does that work? That like Fang is the only sort of spirit animal we've seen like that. So there's so many like different complicated parts to this, and I'm just a little frustrated that what is otherwise an amazing character scene for Suki, you do in the back of your head always think about, like, does this work? Does this make sense? And it doesn't take everything away from the scene, but it just distracts from an otherwise amazing moment. And it's, again, because Faith Erin Hicks has a little bit of a history of just kind of doing stuff without maybe considering its like ramifications on other things. I really wonder, like, how exactly does this come about? Like, was this all Faith Erin Hicks? Did Tim Hedrick agree that this is a correct application of this? who saw this, like what approval things went through to make this happen. It just makes me kind of be like, uh, can we get a more clear explanation of past life communication? Um, because as others have said, does this not open up the door to another sort of slippery slope type thing, where like any character who has any sort of a connection to a past life can just be visited by that spirit at any point if they're in an emotional state? Because as we said, like Suki's not particularly spiritual. Yes, she's doing this sort of Kyoshi meditation thing, but fundamentally, like, she's not doing anything fully spiritual. So, as people have maybe pointed out, like, why wasn't Roku able to effectively like haunt Sozin or something like that? Instances like that, or like Karuk do this and that, or whatever. Um, that's the only kind of problem that you'd have here with regards to the spirits being able to appear at such a distance. It makes sense if like the avatar's right there, because we've seen the sort of possession aspect of the avatar when Aang like becomes Roku, or like Aang becomes Kyoshi. It makes a little bit more sense in that sense, but here it just feels a bit weird. But do you have any more thoughts on this?
Yeah, no, that you do bring up some interesting points there, just in terms of, I guess, sort of the official technicalities of this. I mean, I guess it really, depends on you and sort of how much you're taking stock into sort of how this is actually working in terms of what we know so far, and in terms of what we know our characters have the abilities to do via, their own sort of, I guess, skill set or meditation skill set, and if this is more of a external presence that's visiting her, or more of a internal presence that's sort of visiting her. So there's definitely a couple different interpretations that you can take from this, and I think depending on that determines how much this either irks you, or you can sort of let this go by. But I don't know. I think it is something to consider, and I don't know. I wonder if it is something, as we get more and more media coming up, if this is something that will be more explained, or if it'll still be one of those more sort of like just mysterious sort of spiritually things that just sort of goes by.
Mm. Yeah, I think this is something now to really kind of keep an eye out for. Is that, yeah, in Avatar Studio shows, when we get them, novels, books, comics, how do they portray past life communications, like spirits of the past lives? Because they this obviously kind of like seemingly sort of sets a precedent, that Suki has never met Kyoshi, but just has a sort of connection through the kind of name in a way, because like she's not wearing any Kyoshi Warrior like stuff in this scene, which is why she has to be doing this newly introduced Kyoshi meditation thing to really form a specific connection there. Otherwise, that's why I kind of note that, like, well, that's why I said like Aang has to probably roughly be there as a little bit of a in between. Um, but we'll see how it goes. It's not so like confusing to me that I like take super heavy marks away from the book. I still overall think it's fantastic. It's just, again, I think you could have done something like this if you'd maybe just explained a little bit more, or maybe cut away and like kind of shown Aang like asleep, and that like you get the idea that like, oh, that's what we're meant to be interpreting this as, that like this is related to Aang, which is why you've cut over to him for just like a panel, and then you've cut back here to just show the idea that this is like a projection from the actual avatar. It is that sort of past life communication. It's just happening with Suki. That would have helped it, but otherwise it does present a lot of ideas, and again, the slippery slopes if they really go for it in certain ways. But it's a fantastic ending to the book, and overall, I think Suki Alone was really, really good. It was a long time, I suppose, waiting through Katara and the Pirate Silver, Toph Beifong's Metal Bending Academy, to finally get to a one shot that felt like, yeah, this is the type of book that we want. This is how they should do them going forward. I think the only frustrating thing coming out of this is that right now there's no follow up. Like, we don't know what's next for Avatar comics. We don't know what's next for Korra comics. We've got a free comic book day book coming out in like 2 weeks, and then Chibi comics is everything that's on the horizon. Um, I don't like that they finally hit their stride and immediately we're back to sort of square one, where we don't even know necessarily if they are working on another book. Will we have to get new creative teams again? Is this where we'll see Avatar Studios properly interfere with things even more? Um, that sort of thing, and that if there is a big gap, it might take time again to build up to this level of quality again. Whereas if we had more of a direct follow up where we knew in a few months we're getting the next one shot, I'd be like, yeah, 100%. I'm eager to see the one shot for Haru or whoever they decide to do. But Greg, overall, what are your thoughts on Suki Alone now that we've gone through it in full detail?
Overall, I think, sort of stands out as probably, for most people, and for me, the best of this sort of series. I think the last two of, these one-shot comics definitely worked the best for me. And I think in terms of story content and, sort of, I guess, sort of overall importance, this one definitely has the most to it since it's fleshing out a character that is pretty favored in the community and hasn't got as much sort of attention. So it's nice to actually finally see that for once. And then, sort of the previous one before this, I think had, maybe more the action oriented side of things. So no, I think they're definitely, these seem to be, I guess as of now on the upswing, and we'll just have to see, hopefully that they do more of this in the future.
Yeah, and I think that's the big thing of like they got to a point where this is kind of must read if you're in any way interested in Suki as a character, which I think most people are because she is a member of Team Avatar. You need to read this to get a sort of understanding of like who the character was when she was younger. See those flashback scenes and see her push to her limit, like we've seen all our other main characters push to their limit. That it makes her much more relatable in the same context as all the other characters, where we know Aang has this flaw. This is where Katara's weaknesses lie. This is what Sokka's not good at. We know all about Zuko's weaknesses. So finally getting to see, this is what Suki at times can struggle with is really good, and hopefully this leads to just more Suki content coming up, better Suki content, and major success coming out of this one. I just hope they follow it up at some point. And yeah, it is weird now that we've done this. Like we've done like our coverage on Suki Alone. It is weird to be like, okay, we've got that free comic book day book, and after that, basically nothing, because my expectations are like kind of super low on the Chibi comic. So some announcements I think have to happen sooner rather than later, because as the months go by, we're getting more and more into like the middle of 2022 book announcements, and how long is it going to be before the next comic? Like we're here in July 2021. If they don't announce it within the next like couple of months, it could be July 2022 before like the next proper comic comes out. And again, for the momentum of Avatar with Avatar Studios and so on, I think another delay like this is the last thing that they need. So I don't know. Where do you just I suppose think the comics are at this point? That this is like we've done all the stuff that we like said we do in terms of the series that we were doing at the point where Avatar Studios was announced, and now it seems like anything else that comes out is for sure stuff that was properly produced and thought about post Avatar Studios. Do you think that's all linked and that's why we don't know anything going into the future?
No, I'm more inclined to think that it is linked, which is why we don't know as much. And I think we've said this before that we feel like it's all starting to build up to something where they're going to start, pushing things out, including, whenever they do get around to actually announcing what they're actually, or the official stuff that we know that they're doing with Avatar Studios, it seems like things are probably trying to be more linked up together. I mean, there's just, as of now, as far as I know, there isn't, much direct word on that, and that's something that we're sort of waiting on, and, we're hoping that that will be announced sooner rather than later. I mean, I guess the ideal thing would be at, one of the Comic Cons that are coming up at near the end of the year. But, who knows when we're actually going to get more of the official announcements.
Yeah, New York Comic Con, if it is going to be in person, I guess would be the place to do it if they are going to do things in the way that I suppose the fandom has kind of come to expect them to make their announcements. But there probably is also the opportunity to just like do their own video stream thing, and that be just as popular. That they don't need to do it in the middle of a Comic Con because they sort of know Avatar can work as its own thing. Like you can have just announce the Avatar Direct thing and have it work in the same way Nintendo can just be like, we're doing a Nintendo Direct at any point in the month, and people are going to go watch it. So um, it's really all on them at this point. Like hopefully the planning has included all the publishing stuff, and that the reason we haven't seen a novel, because again it's now a year after the Shadow of Kyoshi has come out, so that's kind of an anniversary that just went by as well. Um, we're waiting for the next novel. We're waiting for the next comic on both sides of things, and whatever else. So yeah, for now the comics are, I suppose, on hold a little bit, I guess, until we see some new stuff. But they've ended on a good note, and we'll see where they go from here. With regards to the next podcast, unless there's some massive news, I'm guessing the next podcast probably will be to when we come together to review the Free Comic Book Day comic, the Korra and the Avatar story. Um, if there's any sort of, I suppose, bigger reveals that come out of the Kickstarter, like we maybe get a tease of some of this new canon information, maybe we'll come back and do that. But more than likely, it probably will be like a week or two until the next comic comes out that we'll come back for another podcast. But yeah, that's been pretty much it. So it's been myself and Greg for Avatar Online Podcast episode 232. Thanks for listening, and bye.
Bye bye.